Hello and welcome to episode number 222. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Nice to have you with us. Before we get started, I wanted to say thank you. 4 weeks ago, I had to fly out to Switzerland to attend a family emergency, and I have received dozens of emails from you with your best wishes. Thank you, everyone, for keeping me in your thoughts. But I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who stuck with me during this time and didn't unsubscribe. I know that 4 weeks of not putting out a new episode is a very long time, but I'm hoping to get back into some kind of a production schedule again. I'm still in Switzerland, and my main priority is still the well-being of my father and his care. However, I'm able to work a few hours every day, so I should be able to keep the podcast going, albeit at a more reduced rate. And now, on with the show. There have been many changes in the focus of organizations, whether they are private or public, away from a traditional product or service centricity towards customer centricity, and projects are just as much part of that change. Projects must deliver value, projects must involve stakeholders, and, as you will hear today, Elizabeth Herrin and her co-author, Phil Peplow, demonstrate convincingly that stakeholders are the ones who get to decide what value actually means. Today's episode is a short guide explaining what customer centricity means in terms of how you work and its importance for project performance, using tools and processes to guide customer-centric thinking, which will help you see the results of engagement and demonstrate how things can improve, even on difficult projects. We'll define what the problem is with how we are doing things today, and then we'll move quickly into the new paradigm. And now, enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview. Today with Elizabeth Herrin, author, blogger, and speaker.
Hello, Elizabeth. Welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Hello, Cornelius. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Well, it's this time of the year again when you and I attend the Global Congress in North America. This year it's in Vancouver.
Yes.
And we do our interview there somewhere in one of the meeting rooms or the big halls that they have. However, neither you or I are there this year,
No.
and they're starting tomorrow, right? What's your excuse?
Well, I'm going to the Ordev Software Project Management or Software Management Conference in a couple of weeks, and two big conferences in the space of a couple of weeks was a bit too much to manage. So this year I've decided that I'm going to Sweden instead to talk at that conference instead of making my way to Vancouver, which is quite a long way to go. It's a shame.
Right.
I've never been to Vancouver before.
I've been there once. I would have been there twice. I've actually already booked my everything to go to Vancouver, and then my family emergency here in Switzerland kind of put a stop to that and I had to cancel everything. So here we are, you in England, me in Switzerland, and this is sort of a virtual, our yearly interview from the PMI Global Congress, coming to you not from Vancouver, but from Solothurn in Switzerland and London in the UK. So, you have published a new book, and it's called Customer-Centric Project Management. And the interview we want to do today, the big idea that you told me about is we want to talk about the fact that post-implementation reviews, they aren't enough, and we should engage people all the way through a project and assess success at every step and not just at the end. So let's begin at the beginning here. Post-implementation reviews. What are they and who's involved in them?
Well, mostly we use post-implementation reviews to determine whether a project has been successful or not. And you might call them project post-mortem or post-project review, but they've all got this word post in common. So you sit down at the end of the project with the stakeholders, with the people who've been working on the project, and work out what worked, what went well, what didn't go so well. And it's often the only opportunity to assess the project's success if you don't have a really serious, robust way of doing benefits tracking.
So what are the limitations here?
Well, I think for me, post-implementation reviews cover process-related things like how we manage schedule changes as a team, whether our monthly reporting schedule gave everyone the information that they needed. And it's an opportunity to discuss statistics and metrics related to the project, but they are normally quite backward-looking. So you might look at things like the percentage of effort spent on testing or how many days it took the quality team to audit deliverables. And that's useful for going forward for future projects so that the other projects have the benefit of your experience in hindsight, but not so useful for you delivering doing a good job on the project that you've worked on because the project's over.
Right.
So there is a logic to doing them. I think it's traditionally the only way that project managers have had to determine whether a project's been a success or not. And we do them because you have to have some way of knowing if you're doing a good job. So you set your success criteria at the beginning and then you pull them out of the drawer at the end, and then you have a meeting to decide if you hit them or not. So we do it because it's a way to assess performance and gather data. But like I say, typically it is quite a retrospective way of looking at whether or not a project was a success.
Right. Very traditional, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the biggest limitation. And sometimes customers will be asked to feed into the project evaluation process, but at that point it's a bit too late to do anything about any points that they raise. So, say they complain that you didn't do enough reporting and they didn't know what was going on. You can't go back in time and then suddenly report more regularly or give them more information. A post-implementation review for me, it's just a case of how can I help you now? It's too late. It's why am I bothering to find out all this stuff now? Great, other projects will benefit, but unfortunately for you, it's too late. And when I was writing the book, with my co-author, we came across some research from a South African university, and it showed that project sponsors prefer people to be proactive with feedback over the whole process, and they prefer to choose to work collaboratively so that they can make sure their expectations are met. So I suppose that's the backwards looking thing is one big limitation of post-implementation reviews. I think the other thing that I find limiting about them is that they focus on the project management side of it, principles and methods, which, like I say, useful about how much time do we spend on testing for the going forward, feeds into other projects, but it doesn't make a distinction between the success of the project and the success of the project management effort. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So we're looking a lot at, did the project deliver what it was supposed to do? That part seems to have been almost forgotten. It's much more around, did we do reports? Did we do quality? Did we do scope? Did we hit the time? Did we hit the budget? Blah, 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 which is how I do as a project manager, not whether I've done anything useful for the business.
All right. Well, it's probably a rhetorical question here already because it's almost a foregone conclusion here. What's the alternative to this?
Well, I'm glad you asked. No.
You're welcome.
I think the alternative for me is, well, firstly, don't stop doing post-implementation reviews. I think there's still great value in doing that. If you don't, you'll never know how you could improve the risk management or scheduling lessons. And so it's still worth doing that, but it's worth doing something else on top of that as well. And that's where I would advocate continuous reviews. So instead of waiting till the end to find out all this stuff, work it out on a monthly basis with the main key stakeholder or the key stakeholders. And I think, I don't know about you, but recently I've been reading a lot of stuff about engagement. You have to do engagement, but there's not an awful lot of practical advice about how do you actually do it and how do you get people engaged, because it's a bit more than sending emails. So having continuous reviews is a very practical way of making sure people stay engaged in the project.
All right. Before we move on to anything more about the continuous reviews here, let's take a sidestep here quickly and talk about your book just briefly.
Okay.
Why did you write about customer-centric project management in the first place?
I think because times are moving on and the old triple constraint way of measuring success doesn't cut it anymore, at least not for me. Right. I think the moment for me came when I realised that even some of the really well-respected researchers and practitioners of project management still had the same view about what makes a project successful as they probably did 15, 20 years ago. And I think project management theory has shifted, and we're now talking about delivering value instead of delivering stuff, deliverables. So that's great. We're moving towards this view of value-driven project management, and people are looking at making sure projects do something useful for the business. But I read a lot of project management books because I write book reviews. And there were 2 books in particular that I read last year that really sort of threw me that we as a profession were still thinking in this way of the triple constraint. And there was a book called Value Driven Project Management by Harold Kersner and Frank Saladis, which is a really interesting book. It's very good, but there is a bit in it that says the last life cycle phase is customer satisfaction management. This is the phase where best practices and lessons learned are captured. And I just thought, the last life cycle phase, when everything else is finished, then we'll ask the customer if they thought we did a good job. And a similar thing, there's a book by PMI actually that was launched at one of the congresses a couple of years ago called Project Management Circa 2025. And it's a book of essays. And there's a couple of researchers in there who have written an essay about the future of project management. And they say the goal of getting projects done right is to have projects come in on time, on budget, and meeting all quality standards. And that is seriously how they think things are going to be in 2025. And I just thought, that these days, we don't assess success at the end of a transaction in any other walk of life. If you're on hold to a call center, you start to assess the success of your call instantly, because you'll start thinking, this music's a bit rubbish, I'm on hold, I'm dissatisfied already, before you even get to speak to a human. And it just seemed a little bit weird that in every other walk of life, we take a view of how people feel, or we feel certain things about a process all the way through. But in project management, we're still looking at it from we'll wait and find out what people feel at the end, and then we won't.
Yeah, you also have a very good example in your book itself where you write about going for a meal where the waiter and the restaurant, they have a process where they interrupt you during your meal and going, is everything all right? Are you satisfied?
Yes.
Right? So they don't wait until the end when they show up with the bill and they go, well, hope you liked it.
Do you wait now?
And yeah, because now, well, it's gone. The food's gone. If you had asked me before, I could have told you that it was cold and you could have reheated it for me.
Yes.
Right. So that approach, I like it. I believe this is the first book that you have written together with a co-author, right? So who is Phil Peplow?
It is the first book I've written with a co-author, and Phil and I have worked together for about 5 years. And he came up with the idea of, we've got the continuous review process is a document called Exceed, kind of like a model. And he came up with that well before we met, and he's applied it in an IT service delivery environment. So to measure satisfaction of sort of ongoing day-to-day IT business services, like whether or not your PC works and you've got all the software that you need, that kind of thing. And then we work together to apply it to IT projects as well. And so in our current day job roles, he manages everything that's business as usual, sort of IT service delivery, and I manage everything that's IT projects. So we've got quite a good split in our department, if you like, between the ongoing stuff and the stuff that is change. And we've managed to apply the same sort of measurement techniques across both halves of the IT department. But I have to say, working with a co-author on a book was much, much harder than writing it by myself. And he's so lovely and so easy to work with, and such an intelligent person with so many bright ideas. And we didn't argue about it at all, but just the concept of having to write a chapter, send it to someone else to review. He was writing chapters and sending it to me, and then harmonizing the two different writing styles. So it reads so that you don't just notice, I wrote that one and Phil wrote that chapter. So that it reads properly. It was really hard.
All right. Well, I said let's take a quick sidestep and talk about your book. It turned out to be a little longer than I had anticipated. No. I think the whole background story with talking about the customer satisfaction and giving the real life examples, I think for me that rang true. And it was important to talk about that. So because now we have established that we need continuous reviews, right? And that we need to include the customer as part of this. And you say in your book also that, let's come back to the principles here, the customer is the most important stakeholder. Why do you say that? Why not the sponsor?
Well, the sponsor could be the main customer.
Oh, of course,
The
yes.
customer
of course.
for me
Right.
is the person who's getting the project deliverables at the end. So
Right.
there's quite a lot of, when we talk about customers, you automatically assume it's the person who buys the product at the end of the sort of consumer. But for me,
Mhm.
I'm talking more around internal colleagues or third-party partners who take a service from another department. So the sponsor is the person who gets the project management service, if you see what I mean.
Right.
But it could be a number of people. So at the project I'm working on at the moment, we have 5 groups of people who, we have one project sponsor, but 5 groups of people who are key to making the project a success. So I speak to all 5 of them once a month, or thereabouts. I try, because they're also stakeholders. They're also customers of the project management service that me and my team provide, and they're customers of each other's service. So, no department operates in a vacuum. You've got finance teams passing information on to business teams who then take IT services from us, and a whole organization is just people doing stuff for other people.
So you have multiple levels of customers.
Yes, and they're all customers of something at the end of the day. And so that's what I mean by a customer, really, is making sure that you're focusing on the people who are getting the benefit from the project, both the deliverables from the project and who are the recipients of the service that your project management team provides.
Right. In my project management experience, I had to take it even a step further because I used to build websites in the past. Right. So my customer, large organizations in Switzerland and Germany who purchased the websites that we built, they put those websites on the web, and their customers actually became the users of the websites and the features we built. So our real customer was the general public who would be using this. So it gets even more complex there. All right. So we've defined why the customer is important, who some customers can be. What success criteria should we use?
I think you should use what's important to the customers, really. I think you've got companies already spend a lot of time looking at consumer satisfaction, and there's lots of different metrics you can use about how your end customers feel about product. But I don't think we spend a lot of time looking at how departments within the company serve each other. There might be an annual staff satisfaction survey, which is an opportunity to air views on how the different teams work together, but it might be a once a year thing. And once you've realised you've got internal customers, you can work out what's important to them. So I would say post-implementation review, do that, measure all the traditional success criteria, like earned value management metrics, number of submitted scope changes, project slip, effort overruns, budget quality, all that kind of stuff. But they're not the things that customers get excited about. Those metrics are always issues that are probably giving them a negative effect on their lives, and are pretty much always yesterday's news. So what's interesting to our project customers are things that excite them, make them interested about the project. And each customer may well have a different view of what success looks like to them. So getting some time with them at the beginning of the project and working out what success means for that person is probably the easiest way, rather than me tell you it should be this, that, the other. Because you're delivering it for a particular stakeholder. It's what's important to them. And that might change, which is where this idea of reviewing continuously comes in. What's important to them at the beginning might shift 3 months in, 6 months in. And you might have to make some tweaks to the project accordingly to make sure that you are addressing those issues.
Right. So we're in the process of making a paradigm shift here. Okay. So we're not just doing the post-implementation review, we're doing continuous reviews, which means we have to set up these reviews at certain stages throughout our project. We're not just talking about the success criteria from a project perspective, but from a customer perspective. Mr., Mrs. Customer, what's important to you? We measure this throughout the project. We make changes throughout the project. What does all of this mean in terms of a paradigm shift? I mean, I'm suddenly, I see a lot more interaction happening here with the customer.
Yes, definitely. And it's a mindset change, I think, especially for people who are working or who are used to working in waterfall environments or following guidance in project management standards. But I think the big thing to bear in mind is it's not just about the things that customers have a right to take for granted. So they hire a competent project manager to do all of this work for them. They would expect the project to hit measures of time, cost, and quality, and that you don't exceed your tolerance levels. So while you're shifting to think about customer satisfaction, that isn't customer satisfaction. That's what you're paid to do. It's just the basic standards. And we used to have an IT director that I worked with who said nobody applauds when you flush the toilet. And I thought, well, that's, for IT particularly, that's really, really basic, isn't it? You expect to come in the morning and you switch your computer on and it works, and that the telephony works, and that you can get a mobile phone signal wherever you are. And this is all basic stuff. So that's not customer satisfaction. It's moving to the next step of making sure that you are in this new paradigm. And I didn't think it was that difficult, actually, to move myself and my project team to that way of thinking, because it just seems natural, especially if you want to make sure that you're delivering something that the customer wants. If you don't keep asking them how you're doing, how are you going to know if you aren't doing it right?
Mm-hmm. The more we talk about this, the more I see a big white elephant standing in the room. And this elephant has five letters written on his side. Okay. And they read AGILE.
Yes.
Agile.
Yes.
So this sounds all very much like an approach taken from some agile methodology, Scrum, Lean, this whole approach. But you have never mentioned it so far. So are we talking about taking some agile principles and implementing those on traditional waterfall methodologies?
I think agile, when you work on an agile project, you do have much greater customer interaction, don't you? Because the customer is embedded in the project team, and therefore you'd expect them to naturally feel more engaged. So I would say there's certainly that approach is definitely something that you can take and apply to a waterfall or a traditional project management method. The thing I think is different, and I don't think is done in agile, is that we ask customers to give us a score out of 10 every month, so we can it's less about, yes, it's around the dialogue, and the dialogue is the most important part. And if you're doing the dialogue, then you're already finding out what's important to your stakeholders, and you're tweaking your approach as you go, and that's great. But the value for me comes in being able to prove to my manager or my project management office that I'm listening to people, I'm taking action, I'm doing something about it, I'm recording what the issues are and dealing with it, because talk is good, but action is more important. And it gives you a way to be able to say, if you start off with getting quite poor scores for things, you can tangibly prove that you're engaging people. You can there's some, I'm not explaining this very well, but there's metrics behind it that satisfy our need to have metrics, because project managers like numbers and things like that to prove that we've done a good job.
Okay, good. Well, with that out of the way, let's look at success here.
Okay.
Have you personally seen any improvements in your project success while you're including customer satisfaction as a criteria?
I think it would be difficult for me to say no because it's not.
I'm like, why did you write the book if it wasn't successful, right?
It's more than just a theory for us. We did this as our day job before we started, Phil and I, to write it down. So yes, we have. It's a short answer. And I think I thought about some of the stories that we've come across since we've been doing this, and I think the most impressive story is that I'm working on a big project at the moment. It hasn't quite finished yet. It finishes in a couple of months, and it's the scores that I was getting from my own colleagues in IT, and they gave the project a score of 2 out of 10 in December 2011 against 4 different metrics. 2 out of 10 was the average. But by October 2012, that was up to 9.75 out of 10.
Nice.
So, it's been a massive journey to engage the technical teams, but it's been absolutely worth it, I think. But what's so ironic about it is that they scored us most harshly. These are my colleagues. They're in the same department as me, and they use the same scoring method. Give me a score out of 10 with third-party suppliers and for their day-to-day service. So they understand how it works. And I think there was probably some element of feeling like all the project team's energy was directed outside of our department to other internal customers. And we'd completely forgotten that our own colleagues were also acting as customers of the project management process. And we'd ring them up and say things like, we need this firewall opened, or can you do this? And and rightly, they were getting a little bit annoyed that we were just assuming that they were able to provide that to us when we were being much more considerate of the feelings towards other teams. So
All right. Well,
we've managed to turn that around, which is quite good.
Excellent. We are going to do a second interview on this topic, and in this second interview, we are going to jump more in depth into how it's done, and we'll look at a case study, and we'll talk through the not the retrospectives, that's the agile term, the continuous reviews that you're doing on your project. So right now, let's bring this to a close here, because I think that our listeners here, they might be keen on trying this out on their own project. So what can they do to integrate customer satisfaction on their projects today? Maybe they're listening in the car, they're driving to work, or maybe tomorrow as they arrive at work. What would you recommend? 2 to 3 things maybe.
Okay, well, I would say start talking to your customers. It's really not that difficult to do. And we ask them 4 questions once a month, which are, what are your top 3 issues? How are we doing with communication? How are we doing with planning? And how are we doing with delivery? And they give us a score out of 10 on each of those different areas. And the scores are useful, but the verbatim comments that you'll hear if you ask your project customers those things will be far more useful to you, because they will start to show you where the project is going off track or where you can do things differently. So I would say, start opening up that dialogue with people, but not just as a one-off. Try to do it as regularly as you can.
Excellent. Elizabeth, thank you very much. Once again, the book is called Customer-Centric Project Management, written by Elizabeth Herrin and Phil Peplow. It is published by Gower Publishing, and it is 115 pages strong. Thanks for being on the program today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that was our discussion with Elizabeth Herrin on what constitutes customer-centric project management. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. And as always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a project manager who wants to become PMP or PMI ACP certified, then the easiest way to do so is with our 2 sister podcasts, the Project Management Prepcast and the Agile Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching the in-depth prep videos from pmprepcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. Project management is the art of creating the illusion that any outcome is the result of a series of predetermined, deliberate acts, when in fact it was just dumb luck. Until next time.